From Paris tonight, a message that echoes far beyond the gilded halls of the Élysée Palace. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in France at a time of mounting uncertainty, carrying with him a stark assessment of the war with Russia. Speaking before cameras, he declared that he has not yet seen any signs from Moscow that it is ready to end the conflict. His words, sober and deliberate, underscore a brutal truth. The war rages on and peace remains elusive. Unfortunately, Zelensky said, "We have no signs from Russia that it really wants to end this war. I am convinced that our union, above all the union of Europe, the Europe that has been at our side since the beginning of the war, that this union between Europe and the Americans will help us to increase pressure on Russia to move towards a diplomatic solution to this complex issue, which is so important for peace in Ukraine and for achieving stable peace in Ukraine and Europe." With this statement, Zelensky placed Europe at the center of his appeal. It is a reminder that after more than 3 years of unrelenting combat, Ukraine cannot carry the burden alone. The war has reshaped the continent, testing political wills, draining treasuries, and straining public patience. Yet Zelensky's words are also a warning. If unity falters, the cost of division will be catastrophic. The backdrop is telling. Paris, long the theatre of high diplomacy, once again finds itself in the spotlight of global geopolitics. President Emmanuel Macron has positioned France as both a mediator and a guarantor. His calls for security guarantees for Ukraine have sparked fierce debate across Europe. Some see it as essential for long-term peace. Others fear it may provoke Russia further. Zelensky's visit is designed to reinforce the first argument, that without firm commitments, peace will never be secured. Since Russia's invasion in February 2022, the stakes have only grown. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians have been killed or wounded. Cities have been reduced to rubble, infrastructure shattered, millions of families displaced. For Ukrainians, the war is not an abstract debate, but a daily fight for survival. Yet for Europe and for the United States, the war has also become a litmus test of values, of whether democracy can withstand aggression and whether collective security can prevail in the face of brute force. But Zelensky's warning arrives at a delicate time. In Washington, political battles over continued aid threaten to weaken America's support. In Brussels and Berlin, fatigue grows as the economic costs mount. Populist voices on both the left and right now argue openly for compromise, even at the price of Ukraine's sovereignty. And in Paris itself, there are voices urging caution, warning that escalation risks dragging Europe into direct conflict with Moscow. Still, Zelensky insists there is no alternative to unity. He frames it as not only Ukraine's struggle, but Europe's survival. The logic is straightforward. If Russia succeeds in Ukraine, no border in Europe will be secure. From the Baltics to the Balkans, from Warsaw to Berlin, the shadow of Russian aggression will loom larger. That is why he repeats again and again the call for Europe and America to stand together. On the other side, Moscow shows no sign of relenting. The Kremlin insists it will pursue what it calls its special military operation until its objectives are met. Russian President Vladimir Putin has poured resources into sustaining the war, mobilizing troops, ramping up weapons production, and forging new partnerships with countries like Iran and North Korea. In this context, Zelensky's remarks in Paris take on a sharper edge. He is not merely diagnosing Russia's intransigence. He is warning that without pressure, diplomatic, economic, and military, the war could drag on indefinitely. And yet behind the firmness of his words lies another calculation. Zelensky knows Europe is weary. He knows publics are questioning the cost. That is why his language blends urgency with reassurance. He speaks of diplomacy not as surrender, but as the end game of pressure. His message is not just to governments, but to the people of Europe. Hold the line, he seems to say, and peace will come, but not if you waver now. France's role in this equation is crucial. President Macron has styled himself as a bridge between Kyiv and Europe, between Ukraine's urgent pleas and Europe's cautious pragmatism. The Élysée Palace, with its centuries of history, now becomes the stage for another battle. One not fought with tanks and missiles, but with words, promises, and commitments. The war, however, does not wait for diplomacy. On the ground, Ukraine continues to face missile strikes, drone attacks, and grinding battles in the east and south. Entire towns remain without power. Hospitals overwhelmed, families scattered. The suffering is constant, the resilience remarkable. Zelensky carries these realities into every meeting, every summit, reminding allies that behind the geopolitics lies a nation still under fire. In Europe, public opinion is divided. Many remain steadfast in their support for Ukraine, staging rallies, waving flags and calling for solidarity. But others, facing high energy bills and economic strains, demand negotiations at any cost. This is the battlefield of ideas where Zelensky's words in Paris are aimed as much at citizens as at leaders. The choice, he suggests, is between the short-term relief of compromise and the long-term security of resistance. And as he walks through the palace halls with Macron, the images are heavy with symbolism. France and Ukraine side by side, presenting a united front. The message is deliberate. Ukraine is not isolated, and Paris remains a partner. But behind the cameras and the handshakes, the questions remain. How much longer can Europe sustain this war effort? And how long before Moscow attempts to exploit fatigue and division? As night falls over Paris, the diplomatic effort continues. Tomorrow's security meeting will gather European officials to consider the next steps. Sanctions, military aid, reconstruction funds, all are on the table. But Zelensky's words tonight set the tone. Without unity, without pressure, there will be no peace. So the message from the Elysee is clear. The war is not ending soon. Russia shows no signs of retreat. Ukraine cannot stop fighting. And Europe, for all its divisions and doubts, must decide whether to stay the course. For Zelensky, the choice is stark. Either Europe and America hold the line together, or the war will drag the continent into deeper peril. From Paris, this is a reminder that history is not waiting. The war continues, peace remains distant, and the outcome for Ukraine, for Europe, for the world is still unwritten.